Today we're here with Dr. Ilaria Bottigliero, IDLO's Director of Research and Learning, and we're going to talk about gender-based violence. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lorelai. Good morning.
So even today, in 2017, women still suffer from alarming levels of violence. What are some of the reasons why this is the case, and what are some of the barriers that women encounter?
Yes, gender-based violence is one of the most widespread human rights violations. It's a global problem. It affects around 1 in 3 women worldwide, and there is a huge problem of underreporting. There are estimates telling us that around 30 to 80% of gender-based violence is simply not reported. It is a problem that affects women worldwide, so it's not only typical of certain countries, but it's typical of all societies and all cultures. And it affects, again, a large sector of the population. It is especially entrenched in war situations and post-conflict situations where, of course, the fragility exacerbates problems for women, problems of violence, but it is a phenomenon that is occurring everywhere, and generally it involves intimate partners or a person that a woman knows. It is a phenomenon that it is very difficult to combat. There are no easy solutions. There are no easy approaches to reduce the instances of gender-based violence. A lot of it has to do with the absence of proper laws and legislations. Gender-based violence is something that is not necessarily considered as a crime or a criminal offense in many societies. So violence against women many times is considered normal, is considered part of family life, is considered part of life in general, and in many countries, instances of criminal violence against women are simply not seen as a crime and therefore not prosecuted and not present in laws and regulations. This creates, of course, a problem of access to justice for women with respect to instances of gender-based violence, and a widespread problem in society who simply do not recognize the criminal nature of certain acts committed against women. The lack of legislation concerning gender-based violence goes, for example, from the lack of laws on the prosecution of rape. So in many societies, rape is simply not considered a crime or a criminal offense. It goes also to touch instances of female genital mutilations, a practice that is not prohibited yet in many countries. And, for example, addressing sexual harassment in the public space. That, of course, is also not regulated in many countries. So the lack of proper laws and legislation looking at sexual and gender-based violence and addressing such cases is a definite obstacle to combating this phenomenon.
And given this complexity, what types of approaches can be taken to effectively address gender-based violence?
What we have seen at IDLO is that a top-down, bottom-up approach to the problem generally works quite well. What I mean by that is a focus on the laws and institutions that prevent violence and that help women access justice. So working with state institutions to make sure that the correct laws are in place, that procedures for women's access to justice are in place, that institutions are competent to handle sexual violence and gender-based violence cases, that judges, lawyers, prosecutors are well trained and capable of tackling these problems is definitely something that needs to be done if we want to obtain some positive results. At the same time, this is not enough, because even if you have a perfect legal system and justice system that is tailored to tackling certain crimes, these are very traumatic situations for women. And the stigma that is associated with these crimes many times prevents women from even wanting to access courts and remedies. So what you need to have is a double type of approach. On the one hand, again, strengthening institutions that tackle these type of crimes, making sure that laws are in place. On the other hand, you need to empower women. That's an absolute must and indispensable component of the framework. You need to have a serious set of activities aimed at empowering women to realize their rights, empowering women to know that they can access courts, empowering women to be aware of what the regulations are, and provide women with the space and the safe areas in which they can safely talk about these issues and find legal support to bring their cases forward.
And what are some examples that you've seen that might be able to offer some solutions?
Yes, there are some examples, although again, the situation is very difficult, so there are no easy solutions. There are some examples where we have seen some degree of success in combating sexual and gender-based violence, even in difficult situations. The first example that comes to mind is Liberia. In Liberia, we have a program of work that targets courts and the strengthening of courts procedures to deal with these cases. So the training of judges, the training of court personnel, and the training of justice sector professionals to deal with these cases, while at the same time we are targeting civil society organizations providing services for victims. So this type of double approach has worked quite well in Liberia. It has even worked well in Afghanistan, even considering the extreme difficulty and the extreme situations that women are facing in Afghanistan. We were able to set up some prosecution units focusing exclusively on violence against women within the Attorney General's office, both in Kabul and in a number of provinces. And these prosecution units, where we have trained, specialized personnel dealing with women's access to justice cases for violent crimes, have been extremely successful. And we have seen a surge of cases handled by the prosecution units with a high number of women approaching the units to resolve their situations. And we have combined this action with the setting up of shelters, so safe spaces for women, so that the centrality of the women's problem is there across the justice chain. So we not only look at the end of the justice path and therefore access to justice in courts, in the formal institutions, but we look at the protection of women since the very beginning of the woman's approach to the justice sector. So we made sure that women are provided with safe access to shelters where they have the proper advice, legal advice, to bring them into a more adversarial system if needed. Similar approaches have also worked in Mongolia, where we are tackling domestic violence issues specifically through a combination of programs putting together the police, the justice sector professionals, civil societies, victims groups, the prosecutor, forensic experts, engaging them in an interdisciplinary dialogue that looks at all aspects of the problem. And that has proven to be quite a successful approach. So I would say we need an integrated approach to the problem, and generally having both the formal aspect and the empowerment aspect working together has worked quite well.